My name is Frances Spaulding, and with Liu Hongbin, I am visiting what used to be called the Jeffrey Museum and has now been renamed the Museum of the Home. We are actually going to see a ceramics art fair downstairs, but before we do that, we're going to look at some of the examples of the rooms that tell us about different periods and how they're decorated, how people lived. Well, we're going to just show a few rooms in the Museum of the Home. This first one is very evidently Victorian. They call it a parlour in 1870. You can see how very thoroughly furnished it is. Every corner has got something in it, and there's wallpaper and patterned carpet, decorations filling the mantelpiece, including a great glass dome over which are probably birds and things caught and fixed for decoration. Piano in one corner, armchairs, potted plants, everything that made a Victorian home seem very comfortable, if in other ways there may have been psychological discomforts going on at the same time. I notice that there's a bell pull on the wall. I think that's what it is, which would mean that there are servants elsewhere who could come in and help. I think there's a print there of the Great Exhibition in 1851, which would give you some idea of the richness of inventions and furniture and all the things available to Victorians in that era. They were very proud of the Great Exhibition of 1851. When we had the same in 1951, it was a bit of a repetition of that. And I think it's a pretty good imitation of what kind of interior sort of middle-class, quite well-to-do person would have lived in at that time. Yes, there's a suggestion that there's children around somewhere with the toys on the floor, not put away as yet. There's the dolly on the armchair, and there's a paisley shawl or piece of cloth on the armchair, very popular form of decoration in the Victorian period. On the top of the table are things we might call carte de visite. Some of them would have had people's a photograph of the person who had called and not found the family in, so they would leave a carte de visite with their name on it. This is because, of course, there were no telephones at this time, therefore it was less quick to give warning of your arrival. As the notice board tells us, we're now in 1915, a drawing room in 1915. And I think if we look at the fireplace, we see immediately its use of brass and the copper shield over the top of the fire that it is a wonderful example of an arts and crafts house. There's a different custom, really, expressed through the design and architecture. Magnificent piano with 2 candles in place, ready to be played. So, it's less heavy than the Victorian period, more conscious of good quality making, design of materials and furniture. It's beginning to allow in a breath of fresh air. Of course, this was the days when people communicated much by letter. The arrival of stamps and letters and so on, well underway at this time, but still no sign in this room, at least, of a telephone, though there could have been one by 1915. I tend to think that the presentation of this room could be a bit improved. Better quality items, more interesting things to show at this period. Of course, 1915 was the wartime, so we must remember that there was a lot of restrictions in place. Interestingly, this is, they say, a flat in 1937, but very, very different to what we've just seen. There's a freshness to it now. the choice of design very definitely responds to the needs of the space. You'll notice that this circular table sits within a sort of bay area where there's a curved window probably made by crystal windows, because the shape of the windows is partly made out of metal windows. There's a gramophone on the sideboard. The sideboard looks like it could have been bought at Heal's, the famous furniture shop, and there's definitely an attempt at stylish living. Look at the drinking glasses ready on the drinks trolley, bottles of water and wine and champagne underneath. But also notice the shape of the armchairs, which is quite different, and resting on one armchair is very definitely a telephone, which again shows a new way of communicating, much quicker, swifter means of getting in touch with your friends and so on. Behind it is an early radio, I think. Maybe it would have been called the wireless in those days, through which much information about the war that was to come would have reached people. They'd listen in to hear what the news on that and other things. It's very strange, those two lights either side of the painting over the fireplace, because they look a little bit like, help me with the word with the type of light, the strip lighting almost. But I'm sure they're not, they're just a modern design. And even the fireplace has a crisp, simple design to it, which is a mile away from what we've seen so far in the Victorian and Edwardian fireplaces. Still burning coal, you'll notice, though. And they've got a magazine resting on the arm of this chair, if you can just see over it. Picture Goer, so it's a magazine about films, I presume. I would have liked them to have had the others anyway. But there's a kind of tidiness that's crept in, which has swept a lot away and made for, I think, a rather more relaxed form of living. Well, this one they call a front room in 1976, and it's just glorious, isn't it? And its exuberant use of things to hang on the wall and suggest interests and enjoyment of colour and a sense of being here. And apparently many of the people who contributed to this room were members of the Windrush generation that arrived in England in the early 50s, or was it late 40s, and brought people from the migrants from the Caribbean. So I think it's an extraordinarily joyous room, wonderfully strange and rich. Notice there's a reproduction of the Leonardo's Last Supper on the back wall, in among things celebrating perhaps the countries that the residents may have come from. And it's a lovely generosity. It's a very generous aesthetic. It doesn't get too hung up on form or careful use of space or matching colours. It just goes for what somebody or other, or maybe the whole family, would have liked and enjoyed. And for that, I think it's got great vitality and richness. Religious content here too, because we get God bless this house, and very probably they would have had strong feelings in that direction. You notice the newspaper on this settee here reads, has a headline in the lower part saying "Black Power or Bloodbath." I'm not exactly sure what time this is because it's referring to Callaghan on the left, but we're very aware that there was this politician who talked about rivers of blood and so on, and gave there was a period of very great difficulty for black people, particularly in the late 50s and 60s on arriving in Britain. So I think behind all this proliferation and exuberance does lie a hard-won life. Look there in that photograph, captioned, "I'm feeling good." Just to the left of the window, yes. Unfortunately, it's got the light across her face. There's a suggestion from this wall hanging that the family kind of family that might have lived here came from Kingston, St Vincent in the West Indies. And it's a lovely little piece of, I don't know what it is, it's not, I thought it was embroidery at first, but it's not, showing the washing and bagging peanuts in St Vincent, St Mary's Roman Catholic Church, fishing boats at Arnes Vale Bay. Lovely sort of sense of relationship to the environment and to what feeds and helps life proceed. So wonderful. And down here we have a picture of Martin Luther King. He changed the course of history, it says. Very, very apt. So a terrific thing for school kids in the area to come and look at, because it tells you so much about British history and Caribbean history and what happened at this time when they merged into British life. On this little bit of the museum floor, we've got one called a loft-style apartment in 1998. And they're very definite about who lives here, which I think is a bit of a shame, because a lot of people could relate to this style, but they want it to be up to the minute. So we've got Matthew and Ben, partners, living in this very beautiful, airy, loft-style apartment. You can just see the kitchen round the corner here. So it's open plan, and you can move very easily from the kitchen into the sitting room, or you can sit there at the bar and make comments on the cooking and have a drink. It's got a set of prints that all sort of match and relate to one another, and it's very, very sparse in some ways, but that is part of the new style of living, I think. Out of the muddle and mess of our cities, people feel happier, I think, in a well-organised home. So this is very enviable, I think, for people who would like to have their own flat, a little bed space. You climb up the staircase above the kitchen to find the bedroom in a tiny little space, but perfectly feasible. And so they say this is 1998. I suppose that's about right for the television set. If it was today's world, it would be a lot bigger. But it's very neat, and I think you've got CDs, is it? This window suggests that it's a loft space in a converted industrial building, and details of that kind still remain. And this must be the bathroom through the door there, just enough space to have a small bathroom. So you can see how it is possible to live well, with enjoyment and pleasure, in a very small space. Notice the way the radiator is a simple sort of tube running across just under the window. You'll probably be conscious now that design actually not only has an aesthetic history to tell, but also the ethos that is attached to the aesthetic and how it changes throughout the ages. You can see this one, whoever lived here, they've been at a protest, protesting rather generally about repression. The suggestion on the wall is that obviously being a gay couple, they will be involved with LGBT politics and so on. So this is, almost up to the minute, even if it's still 20 or more years ago now. Some people might find it a bit too neat and tidy and perfect. We're rather messy livers, Take off our shoes, throw them around. Okay, well that was fun, wasn't it? It's rather... Oh, well, we've just done a little narrative about the rooms upstairs.
I see. Yes.
This is Hongbin, new Hongbin. Two Potter friends, Ruth King and Sophie McCarthy. We have to move across and up. Here we are looking at Ruth King's ceramics in the
Ceramics in the City?
Ceramics in the City exhibition, which is just 3 days long. It's a kind of craft fair, and it's been here every year except during the pandemic, hasn't it?
Yes.
So it's had a break.
Yes, it had a break. It started, I think, maybe 2002, 2003.
Yeah. This is a very unusual form of ceramics, I think. It's salt glaze, and I'm going to ask the maker to explain that a bit because it's quite complicated. So if we look at the particular, was that surface one with the blue in it? Was it this one?
That one, yes.
Ben, if we hold the, oh dear, we're a long way away. I'd love to know how you managed to get a sudden burst of blue in among this sort of beautiful silvery grey greens that are otherwise in this pot.
Well, this is all to do with the placing in the kiln.
Right.
So if you think of salt glaze as being a very active process,
Because it vaporizes.
because it vaporizes in the kiln,
Yes.
fills the kiln with vapors and circulates throughout the kiln,
Yeah.
depending on where you place the pots and what angle you place them at, you get different results. So
Yeah.
this particular rather wonderful blue blush down there is due to the proximity.
Did you get the blue blush?
It's due to the proximity of this particular part of the pot to where the salt first vaporizes. So it gets a particularly strong blast,
yes,
but
yes.
it's very directional.
Yes. So you can, to some extent, control it, but not very much.
Absolutely, yes.
And this one too has a sort of beautiful sudden shininess and the sides. So the same thing would have happened.
Similarly, yes, it's very much to do with how the vapors move across the surface of the pot, and whether it's in the hottest part of the kiln or the coolest part. So, for instance, this piece here has exactly the same materials on it,
Yes.
but it was at the top, at the back of the kiln, whereas the others were at the bottom, at the front.
I see. So it can't get the same effect on the inside.
No, you
yes.
don't get the same on the inside, and it's a much softer, more bronzy colour
It's beautiful. Absolutely
than
beautiful.
the blacker.
Stunning. But then with this one, you get again a very intense silvery thing, quite different, don't you? So
Yes, this one actually has been through twice, because the first time it came out a bit dull, so I put it back in and it had another dose, and it's really enriched it hugely.
yes,
And again, it's something that this surface will only come from having been in twice.
I see.
So each time it's very, very particular.
I find it a fascinating shape because the break in the top suggests, of course, a relation to a vase, but the fold in the side here gives a sense of an arm.
Yes, funnily enough, this one I think of as being like a cloak around a person, you know, on a sort of 19th century sweeping black cloak with a neck hole at the top. But
Yes.
it's obviously also quite like a bottle vase of some description, but with these indents which articulate the movement and the surface and give it a human body feel to it in some way.
Quite amazing. I've never seen anything like it. Yes, wonderful. Terrific. If you had that in a room, it would really be a presence, wouldn't it?
Yes, I
Create
think
a
so.
tremendous
It's
presence,
a
yes.
very robust piece.
So you can drop it occasionally then.
Yes.
So if I can see that you, I mean, I always thought that modern pottery was either green or brown or faintly blue, but this is very, very colourful. Are you sort of trying to negate a long-standing tradition?
I'm not sure about negating, but I've always
Challenge. Are you trying to challenge this tradition of
I could
doerness?
say. I mean, I've been doing this for about 35 plus years, and I suppose I've always been more drawn to colour than dark. You know, everything I do is under the glaze. So my glaze is a very straightforward, transparent glaze, which brings out everything that I've done underneath.
Yes.
So it's not about glazes; it's about slips and coloured slips.
Are there different kind of slips then that you
Well,
use?
they're just it's the liquid clay. I have a palette of colours which are just with the base slip clay with white base, which I add colours to in different degrees of thickness. Some are very thin, some are a bit more. They're never thicker than consistency of double cream, for instance.
Otherwise, it would get too bumpy, would it? Is that right?
It would be a bit lumpy, yeah.
Bumpy.
But everything's sieved, you know, it's all very smooth. So I apply these colours in various degrees of thickness with one colour over another, and then I use paper cutouts, stencils to copies of real leaves, the birds, and
That's the Chinese ginkgo tree, isn't it? The ginkgo leaf.
yes,
Yes.
it's a ginkgo leaf. I think is it Japanese as well, or did you have ginkgo? Is it Chinese or yeah? But the Japan have them too, don't they? Yeah. But you get them here.
What I especially like in these mugs is the single colour inside. So this one is pinky orange, and this has got a lovely deep
So
blue.
I like to have the colours sort of bouncing around, and I mean not all the time. I mean there are some sort of, this is a slightly more subdued colour tone. You know, it's sort of not quite as, doesn't sort of jump out at you as much as others. This was a happy accident. This effect here.
It's not like Ruth King's work that she.
What'd you say?
She likes happy accidents too, Ruth King.
Yeah. Well, I was pouring what is a thin black, which was supposed to be like this over everything, and there was a deposit in the jug at the bottom.
Yes.
So when I finished the last bit of pouring, it was all this, and I thought I'd ruined it. But in fact, it turned out to be quite nice.
Quite elegant, yes. Beautiful shape, I have to say. That
Anyway, the effect
jar.
was not as bad as
Very
I
good, yes.
feared.
Very interesting.
So there we are.
Is your mother?
Of course you can, absolutely.
This is Hongbin, who's going to do the photography. And would you like to talk about one pot in particular? So we only got, they're throwing us out in about 3 minutes' time.
Well, I should talk about these things.
That's
These are
rather
some
lovely,
of
isn't it?
the
Beautiful.
things I enjoy making the most.
Would you call that
I call it a basketball
a basket?
for serving food, or could equally be a decorative piece.
Yes, beautiful. Lovely shape. I love the handles.
Yeah,
Just
so-
right for it, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's something just quite pleasing about them.
Yes. Do you sign this on the bottom?
I do. There's my potter's mark there.
Ah, yeah.
F and L and a J.
Yes.
Um,
That's how to, you can identify pots often from the potter's mark at the bottom.
And I think for a lot of potters, bowls, well, potters that throw anyway, bowls are one of their favourite things to make because they come quite naturally.
Yes, it's that sense
And that's the
of
same for me.
fullness, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that's what's so wonderful about ceramics, is that when they really work, they have a fantastic fullness and stillness that comes from the shapes and so on, and the colours.
So I like to leave some of the throwing lines in as well, just to kind of leave a bit of life in them.
Yeah.
So all of my patterns are inspired by embroidery or mark making and sort of lino cut printmaking, so quite kind of immediate marks and quite definite marks. And this one in particular was inspired by stuffing stitch, which is a knitting stitch. And I was quite interested in the optical illusion of movement on a flat surface or on a sort of smooth surface, but then introducing some undulation.